I am here to present a lecture on the topic of acculturation, assimilation, alienation, cultural transition, and also we will be discussing what are the psycho-social effects of migration, and we will also discuss what are the various government policies that are in place to help the disadvantaged groups in India. The main objectives of today's lesson are to understand cultural transition, acculturation, acculturative stress, assimilation, alienation, and psycho-social effects of migration, the topic of disadvantaged groups in India, and government policies for disadvantaged groups in India. Cultural transition. Culture has been defined as the different socially transferred beliefs, values, behaviors, and knowledge among individuals of a community independent of their genetic factors. The word culture is used because it implies the integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions of a racial, ethnic, religious, or social group. In other words, the term culture refers to the behaviors, customs, and traditions from generation to generation. This includes ways in which individuals from different backgrounds experience the world around them. Cultural transitions often involve individuals shifting their life space from one cultural context to a different cultural context, most typically in terms of relocating from one nation to another nation. We can call these as migratory transitions. Cultural transitions are concerned with the transitions between cultures in which individuals live. Cultural transitions have been extensively studied with respect to the psychological processes by which individuals adapt to new cultures. Cultural adaptation through transition is a very much bidirectional process in which both individuals and cultures adapt. Conceptualizing transitions in this way brings attention to the second broader type of cultural transition. Cultural transition for those who are not making a transition but rather are subject to a transition. We can call these as stationary transitions. If we accept the idea that cultures change in response to those who are part of them, then it stands to reason that individuals with a history of living in a particular cultural context will need to adapt to such changes. Some changes can be slow, whereas others can be quite fast. The distinction between migratory and stationary transitions is similar to the distinction between voluntary and involuntary immigrants. Voluntary immigrants are those who made the transition of their own will, seeking to change the context to seek a better life or access to new opportunities in some way. In contrast, involuntary immigrants had no choice. They might have been forced to leave their homeland due to political conflict, such as the case of refugees taken from their homeland, such as the case of slaves from Africa, or due to the power grabs via colonization, rendering the indigenous people as the minorities, such as the case of Native Americans and blacks in South Africa, and so on. We are living in a post-modern world where the technology changes rapidly. Such a rapid change in technology would bring with it changes in the culture in which we live. People also migrate from one cultural community to another cultural community, either as students or immigrants. Cultural transition has become an important part of every modern professional's life. We are living in a global era of increasing international mobility and intercultural contact. Cultural transitions connect conceptually with the notion of adaptation. Psychological and socio-cultural adaptations are required during cultural transitions, and from the viewpoints of current cross-cultural psychology, individuals are seen as active agents in cultural transitions. Acculturation. Acculturation is a process of social, psychological, and cultural change that stems from the balancing of two cultures while adapting to the prevailing culture of a society. Acculturation is a process in which an individual can adopt, acquire and adjust to a new cultural environment. Individuals of a different culture try to incorporate themselves into a new, more prevalent culture by participating in the aspects of the more prevalent culture, such as their traditions, but still hold on to their original cultural values and traditions. The effects of acculturation can be seen at multiple levels in both a devotee of the prevailing culture and those who are assimilating into the culture. At this group level, acculturation often results in changes to the culture, religious practices, healthcare and other social institutions. These are the significant ramifications on the food, clothing and language of those becoming introduced to the overreaching culture. At the individual level, the process of acculturation refers to the socialization process by which a foreign born individual blends the values, customs, norms, cultural attitudes and behaviors of the overarching host culture. This process has been linked to changes in daily behavior as well as numerous changes in psychological and physical well-being. As enculturation is used to describe the process of first culture learning, acculturation can be thought as second culture learning. Under normal circumstances that are seen commonly today, the process of acculturation normally occurs over a large span of time throughout a few generations. Physical force can be seen in some instances of acculturation which can cause it to occur more rapidly, but it is not the main component of the process. More commonly, the process occurs through social pressure or constant exposure to the more prevalent host culture. Scholars in different disciplines have developed more than 100 different theories of acculturation, but the concept of acculturation has only been studied scientifically since 1918. As it has been approached at different times from different fields of psychology, anthropology and sociology, numerous theories and definitions have emerged to describe the elements of acculturative process. Despite definitions and evidence that acculturation entails a two-way process of change, research and theory have primarily focused on the adjustments and adaptations made by minorities such as immigrants, refugees and indigenous people in the response to their contact with the dominant majority. Contemporary research has primarily focused on different strategies of acculturation, how variations in acculturation affect individuals and interventions to make this process easier. Acculturation comprehends those phenomena which result when groups of individuals having different cultures come in continuous first hand contact with subsequent changes in the original culture and patterns of either or both groups. According to the Social Science Research Council, acculturation is defined as culture change initiated by the conjunction of two or more autonomous cultural systems. Acculturative change may be the consequence of direct cultural transmission. It may be derived from a non-cultural cause such as ecological or demographic modification induced by an impinging culture. It may be delayed as with internal adjustments followed upon the acceptance of alien traits or patterns, or it may be a reactive adaptation of the transitional modes of life. These two formulations bring out important points into the discussion. A culture change may be caused due to the direct or indirect contact between two cultures. The change may occur in two intensity, delayed and reactive means a rate of change, and adaptation within other culture is quite fast. Acculturative stress. Acculturative stress is nothing but the large influx of migrants around the world has sparked a scholarly interest in the acculturation and how it can specifically affect health by altering levels of stress, access to health resources and attitudes towards health. The effects of acculturation on physical health is thought to be a major factor in the immigration paradox, which argues that the first generation immigrants tend to have better health outcomes than non-immigrants. Although this term has been popularized, most of the academic literature supports the opposite conclusion, or that immigrants have poorer health outcomes than their host culture counterparts. One prominent explanation for the negative health behaviors and outcomes like substance abuse or low birth weight is mainly associated with the acculturation process is the Acculturative stress theory. Acculturative stress refers to the stress response of immigrants in response to their experiences of acculturation. Stressors can include but are not limited to the pressures of learning a new language, maintaining one's native language, balancing different cultural values and brokering between native and host differences in acceptable social behaviors. Acculturative stress can manifest in many ways, including but not limited to anxiety and depression, substance abuse and other forms of mental and physical maladaptation. Stress caused by acculturation has been heavily documented in phenomenological research on the acculturation of a large variety of immigrants. This research has shown that acculturation is a fatiguing experience requiring a constant stream of bodily energy and is both an individual and familial endeavor involving enduring loneliness caused by seemingly insurmountable language barriers. One important distinction when it comes to the risk for acculturative stress is the degree of willingness or migration status, which can differ greatly. If one enters a country as a voluntary immigrant, a refugee or asylum seeker or a sojourner. Assimilation. Assimilation refers to a process whereby a group of people, having lived among another group of people for a considerable period of time among another group of people, adopt the ways of life of the latter in such a way as to make it completely indistinguishable from the latter. When the social processes reach a high degree of integration, it takes the form of assimilation. It is something like biological system of food assimilation, in which complex food materials are broken into simpler substances and assimilated into the body. At the stage of integration, culture, traits, quite like food materials, maintain their identity, but finally in assimilation lose their identity. This is a very complex process and hardly any society reaches the stage of perfect assimilation. In assimilation, the people and their culture do not maintain their individual identities. It was in the 50s that US society was near assimilation, but soon it became clear that each linguistic group and nationality maintains that separate identity. In our country too, in view of the multi ethnicities, multi languages and multi regions and multi identities, integration can be attained only in a limited way. We can maintain our ethnic identities and at the same time identify ourselves with secularism, socialism, democracy and scientific ethics. We could also follow a common economic system and the mode of administration. In this kind of integration, on one hand, the different aspects of culture maintain their identity and autonomy, and on the other hand fall into the national mainstream. Obviously, assimilation is a higher social process of integration. This is a stage which is very difficult to attain. Generally, it has been observed that process of assimilation is very complex and perfect assimilation seems almost impossible. Alienation. Alienation is a feeling of estrangement in the learning process that students might feel. It is marked by an individual's separation from his or her environment and the lack of connectedness. Alienation is a multi-dimensional construct which consists of 4 dimensions: powerlessness, meaninglessness, normlessness and estrangement. Powerlessness is represented through the loss of control over events in one's life. Powerless students are more likely to be manipulated and used by others, and given their feeling of helplessness in controlling the events in their life as well as the consequences in the social systems. They feel as if others are using them and they live in the constant threat of having their lives affected by forces over which they have no control. Secondly, meaninglessness is characterized by the inability to predict outcomes. Meaningless students are lacking understanding of the school activities in which they participate, which leads them to feel uncertain whether the school will bring about a positive impact to their future. Thirdly, normlessness is marked by the loss of socialized values that give life a purpose. Normless students are more likely to experience uncertainty in deciding what rules to be followed, while feeling supported to break the rules of society and showing great concern on getting ahead as well as obeying others for appearances only in the surface. Fourth, estrangement is mirrored through the feeling of loneliness or separation from group norms or standards. Estranged students tend to enjoy loneliness and dislike others' company. Feeling alienated can lead to many different social problems that include drug or alcohol abuse, criminal activity, poor school or work performance. Alienation may also increase the symptoms of mental and physical disorders that can include psychological pain, including anger and depression, health effects from drug or alcohol abuse, eating disorders, and attempted suicide also can be one of the possibilities. Psychosocial impact of migration. Migration can be defined as a movement of a person or a group of persons for any length of time and includes both long term and temporary migration as well as remigration and circular migration. Moreover, migration may take place across an international border or within a state. Also, a distinction must be made between forced and voluntary migration. Through the division between two may sometimes be hazy, that is, poverty may force people to immigrate. Forced migration implies that people have been forced to flee their homes to seek refuge elsewhere. Reasons for migration include war, persecution, and natural disasters. In contrast, voluntary migration signifies leaving one's own home of one's own free will in search of a better life elsewhere. In this context, the forces behind migration are often described as a combination of push and pull factors. Push factors include poverty, demographic growth, war, and political repression, while pull factors include the demand for labor, good economic opportunities, political freedom, and social ties. In short, migration is a multifaceted phenomena that does not merely entail a geographical move, but forms a more complex, dynamic social, economic, environmental, and cultural process of change. Migration may thus be viewed as a fundamental biographical life experience, resulting in a change in the life circumstances by which the migrant's life comes to differ from that of non-migrants. Migration is a worldwide phenomena that has always been a part of human history. Migrating to a different country has important psychological and social implications for the individual and the family. For instance, these implications may involve less informal support or assistance that was previously provided by family, friends, and schoolmates. Furthermore, it might signify having to learn a new language and a new social norm to adjust to new social and cultural environment. There are many reasons why families migrate, but one of the most evident reasons is the desire for a better life. Migration is a complex phenomena that depends on individuals and the circumstances for migration as well as the environment of the host country. Migration processes may be divided into different phases. Each of phase entails a number of health risks. In the pre-migration stage involves exposure in the utero and later in life and may include infectious agents, starvation and malnutrition, as well as lack of access to health care. Moreover, it may involve factors leading to migration such as poverty, war, violence, trauma and torture. The second stage, migration itself, is the physical relocation of individuals from one place to another, which may also involve health hazards including physical and mental stress. The third stage is the post-migration stage, which concerns the adjustment of the migrant to the social, political, economic and cultural framework of the immigration country. Post-migration risk factors for ill health include uncertainty and waiting during asylum procedures, isolation, social marginalization, loss of identity, language barriers, barriers to health care and discrimination. As a result of these migration related exposures, migrants carry different risk factors and disease profiles than non-migrants in immigration countries. Migrants may simultaneously experience more challenges in accessing healthcare services associated with newness, as well as language and communication barriers, which may lead to delays in diagnosis and treatment. Moreover, some experience legal barriers to access to healthcare. There are four main categories of migrants: voluntary migrants, those that leave the country of origin to find employment, economic opportunity and advanced education, marriage, or to reunite with their family members that have already immigrated. Refugees, those who have been involuntarily displaced by persecution, war or natural disasters. Asylum seekers, those who willingly leave their native country to flee the persecution or violence. Sojourners, those who relocate to a new country on a time limited basis for a specific purpose. It is important to note that this group fully intends to return to their native country. Disadvantaged groups. The Indian society presents a hierarchically arranged social structure with people at the lower strata suffering from many disadvantages. Due to the traditional vertical social structure and lack of resources, those belonging to the scheduled caste as well as scheduled tribes suffer from economic insufficiency and social disadvantages. Due to this, they suffer from malnutrition, lack of provisions for health and sanitation and education. The efforts to bring about social economic transformation of the weaker sections have not been able to change the situation significantly. Deprivation plays a crucial role in human behavior in Indian society. Despite various efforts by society and government, many segments of Indian society have not been able to get equal opportunities. Structural discrimination faced by disadvantaged groups in India. In India, members of gender, caste, class and ethnic identity experience structural discrimination that impact their health and access to health care. Women face double discrimination being members of a specific caste, class or ethnic group apart from experiencing gendered vulnerabilities. Women have low status as compared to men in Indian society. They have little control on the resources and important decisions regarding their lives. In India, early marriage and childbearing affects women's health adversely. In India, institutional delivery is lowest among women from the lower economic class against those from the higher class. A major proportion of the lower caste and Dalits are still dependent on others for their livelihood. Dalits does not refer to a caste, but it suggests a group who are in a state of oppression, social disability and who are helpless and poor. Programs and policies of the Indian government to the aid of disadvantaged groups in India. The government has formulated many policies and schemes for the well-being of socially disadvantaged groups like the SC, ST and OBC and the minorities, since they still continue to lag behind the rest of society due to their social and economic backwardness. Efforts are being made for the advancement of these socially backward groups so that they can be brought at par with the rest of society. Simultaneously, new measures have been adopted to accelerate the process of empowering these weaker sections. Empowerment of these groups essentially encompasses three vital interrelated social components like social empowerment, economic empowerment and social justice. I would like to summarize what we discussed so far in the lecture today. Began by understanding what is the topic of cultural transition, then we learnt what is acculturation, we then discussed what is acculturative stress, then we discussed what is assimilation followed by alienation, and we also discussed what are the various psychosocial impact of migration. Then we discussed what is meant by the term disadvantaged groups in the Indian context, and then we also discussed what are the various government policies and programs that have been constructed to help the weaker sections in Indian society.